Welcome to Drive Time Exchange. As rubber hits the road, hard talk meets great music. Monday to Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. on Net Radio, taking you above and beyond.
So I am party of India. India, the Indian worship and the slavery bind together two races in unity. There was no more mother Africa, no more mother India, just mother Trini. My Bahuta planted sugar cane down in the Caroni plain. Ram Logan Basdale percussion high. Jahaji Pai, brotherhood and the boat. Jahaji Pai, brotherhood and the boat. Jahaji Pai.
And with that, we say a very special good day to you, everybody, wherever you may be, Trinidad and Tobago, our neighbors in the Caribbean, our friends who are streaming all around the world. We welcome you to New Era TT Radio and taking you above and beyond. All right. And of course, this is the Drive Time Exchange, and this is where we talk about so many different things. And today's going to be a very special day with our host, journalist extraordinaire himself, Mr. Tony Fraser. Tony, good afternoon to you.
So, Charles, how are you, my friend?
I'm actually really good. I'm enjoying the weather today.
All right, yeah, a little bit of sprinkling here and there. Some of the harsh sunlight and heat of the last few months. The forecasters says that it's going to get more rainy than the present. In fact, they're predicting some storms and hurricanes and all of that. Part of living in the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, well, that's part of it.
I like the piece that you've chosen there, Charlo, to open the batting, as it were.
Yes, you're most welcome.
All right, so we will be coming to you every now and again to give us some indication. Perhaps you could start now by telling our panelists and our listeners about this radio station, your own invention, as it were. Go ahead.
Invention, creation, call it what you may want, but yes, we are here. We are New Era TT Radio, and people, you can find us at www.newerattradio.com. That's our website, and of course on the social media platforms at social media in the sense of Facebook and YouTube, Instagram. You get us at New Era TT Radio, and also we're streaming on TuneIn, where for all those Alexa apps and stuff, you can get us there and tune in at New Era TT Radio. And of course, we are streaming also. Well, the morning show we stream on M&E TV, which links us with all of the cable channels like Flow and Amplier, Trico, and a couple others in between there. So so once you put in New Era in your New Era TT in your browser, you will find us.
Wonderful. And of course, the very important part which you've not mentioned, but which is critical, we need advertisements, right?
Definitely. So let me put it in one time. So if you would like to advertise with us, we welcome you. You can give us a call at 299-5156. That's 299-5156. And of course, we will make sure everything is okay.
As Max Senhouse used to say back in the 80s, we need the money. I
wonder if they will allow me to use that phrase.
Anyhow, seriously, we are experimenting with a possibility this afternoon, and it comes with the Indian Arrival Day. asking a question, really projecting into a possibility which has not worked in the past, but looking at it again, looking at it from the prospect of, or the perspective, not of the party in power dominating, succeeding, or indeed failing, but rather the bigger question of whether or not um, groups in the society, political, ethnic, religious, cultural groups, can come together in a meaningful way in the interest of the society. One political party in today, the other one out tomorrow, etc., etc. So we are not saying that even if there is one party in power at the present, with an experiment, that party should stay in power. We are looking at the bigger question as to whether or not, especially with regard to the two major parties, which we know each one has its base in its ethnic um, majority, and therefore mobilizes and contests elections plural on that basis. So I've assembled some people, asked some people who have graciously agreed to come and chat on this possibility. A couple of them have had experiences in some of these experiments. David Abdulah, who we all know as the political leader of the MSJ, career trade unionist, who has been involved in a number of political amalgams going back to the 1970s with the Labour Party that was formulated by Basdeo Pandey and people like Shah, Rafiq Shah, and a number of other trade unions. Welcome to the program, David. I think you need to take
it. Yes. Good afternoon, Tony. Good afternoon, Sir Charles. Congratulations, Sir Charles, on your new venture.
Thank you very much, David.
Best wishes to you. Of course, we go back many moons ago when I started talk radio on Abercrombie Street.
Yes.
8 o'clock, and you and others were the people who made sure that the show ran properly from a technical point of view. So it's good to see you, doing your own thing.
Thank you so much.
Tony. Yeah.
Yes, and we wish him all the very best. Yeah, for this venture. One door closed and he opened another door for himself. So great going, Chalo. We also have Ramona Ramdial, who has always also been part of one of these experiments, not as far back as David and people like myself. We are the seniors in this group. But nevertheless, somebody who has ventured forth into the political world, has had her ups and downs with a political leader and so on and so on. And so therefore, she's in a good position to project. There is nothing certain about what we will say this afternoon, but rather, scoping out a possibility. Welcome to the program, Ramona. And you need to take off your suit, right?
And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. And we have Nkoli Edwards, who is has been involved in some political experiments himself. Was one, if my memory serves me well, he was once put in the Senate. I think Basdeo Pandey was the political leader of the party at that point in time, and he has been soldiering on with his own little political outfit. And welcome to the program, Nkoli.
Hi, afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here joining the discussion. I think it's an important discussion, and to be among other esteemed persons giving their opinion, I really do value that. So thank you.
Right. And we're going to have later in the program Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath, who couldn't be here at this point in time, but will join us a little bit later. We were supposed to have Dr. Jerome Tilak Singh, the historian, but he had to drop out at the last moment. So, folks, let me pose the question, which is not even fully formulated in my mind, that can this, and I put it against the background of Indian Arrival Day in a different kind of context. We usually talk about Indian Arrival Day, African Arrival Day, etc., in the sort of core context of their existence. But I'm opening up the lens a little bit and asking the question, can this be some kind of opening possibility, notwithstanding all of the failures of the past, and we recognize them going back to the 1970s. And indeed, before that, I remember a local government election where there was some kind of alliance also. So let me start off with Ramona. Your thoughts on the subject?
First of all, let me say, having entered from education into politics, it was quite an eye-opener for me. And apart from carnival, I think elections is the second main event that is able to bring all of our people together. Cultures, ethnicities, race, all of our peoples. I think during an election, apart from carnival, is where you have that national unity feel, and where it is you are able to mobilize and bring everybody together for a common goal and a common purpose, and that is, of course, winning elections.
I don't know if you are aware, but Valentino has a line, when the carnival come and pass, we go back to the race and class. He's not convinced that it's something stable. Yeah, I just throw that in.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So go ahead. Yeah.
But I think at my age and my era, I am in my 40-something. I think that the race relations in Trinidad and Tobago has not been so bad, or we have improved over the years. We've been able to revolutionize the way we operate in Trinidad and Tobago without having any sort of major civil war or anything like that over the years. We've been able to thread carefully and also unifyingly in terms of coming together. So in 2010, when I entered politics, it was an eye-opener for me. And we were part of this famous Fraser Accord. And I was the youth speaker. But in the lead up to that, I saw some of my senior leaders at work and how they did it, how they brought everybody together. And one of our deputy political leaders at that time was Mr. Jack Warner. No, I think he was chairman after the Honorable Prime Minister had defeated Mr. Pandey in the election. So he was our chairman. And he was leading and building the momentum with respect to mobilizing a nation to win an election on behalf of the UNC and its partners. So that Fraser Accord, I don't know if any one of you were there at Fraser on the grounds on that day, but it was if not the largest crowd, but one of the largest crowds that I have seen in my political lifetime at that Fraser Accord signing. And on the stage, we had all of the stakeholders, all major interests were being represented there. As I said, I was a youth speaker, and it was really, something for me to see, something of beauty, in my experience, to see Tobago in. We had the unions in, we had the different parties, and Jack McCandle Dagger was with us on stage. We had Winston Dukaran of the COP, the UNC, and you know how it went. So it was really a thing of beauty for me to see. And that is where it occurred to me that racial harmony, unity, national unity is not a far-fetched, thought or idea. These things can exist, throughout. We don't have to wait for an election to be unified. We don't have to wait for Carnival to unite. This is something that can be ever present, always present in our diaspora here in Trinidad and Tobago. But after the elections, as you know, as you just quoted from Valentino, it's a different story. The same for Carnival. Everybody goes back to their busy lives and things happen. And the question that arises, Mr. Fraser, is one of them, major, that I put in my articles in recent time. Is it that our leaders are the ones for uniting, yes, responsible for uniting, but also responsible for dividing us thereafter?
Okay, and all right, so we'll go into the details of that in a moment. Ramona Ramdial talking about possibilities raised in 2010, and you were probably too young in 1986.
Yes.
But those possibilities were that sense of unity was even greater then, and it came to not too long after all the hugs and kisses and so on and so on.
Correct. Correct.
So that's your opening statement. Let me go to Nikolai. Nikolai,
Yes. No, I do think that it was an interesting note what Ramona ended on in terms of understanding the roles of our leaders when it comes to cultural and social interactions, or because quite often I think that we stop at seeing that the government or our leaders are responsible for the economy of our country, and that's one aspect of it. But we do have to look at other aspects such as the social, the cultural, and the political. And maybe it's high time that we ensure that that's a part of our screening process, so to say. When we are looking at whom we may be voting for, we have to understand what are their plans, their actual hardcore plans in terms of uniting a nation. In Trinidad and Tobago, I do think that quite often, we use the term a rainbow nation, we say we are Callaloo and so on, and it's really a source of pride for us as Trinbagonians. But the unfortunate reality is that from administration to administration, there isn't sufficient effort, I think, in ensuring that there is some plan or strategy or policy in place that is not just built upon behind closed doors in offices and so on, but we bring that to the ground, because there are these issues where growing up in the education system, yes, we may in social studies class learn about different public holidays and religious observances and so on. But there is still a certain level of ignorance, I would think, as we have failed to capture certain generations in implanting in their minds the importance of really respecting one another, discipline, production, tolerance, that tolerance aspect. And it's high time that we implement a national program where using state media, using all of the channels available to us, that we try to dispel some of the myths that citizens across the board may have when it comes to religions or the creeds that are not theirs. So when it comes to race, particularly, Trinidad and Tobago, one of the things we tend to boast about on everyday instances, who may be a Douglas, because when we see races coming together, we see that as some sort of a celebration. It's a phenomenon that I look on at and I observe. But the reality is there is a desire, I think, to see a blending of cultures, a blending of experiences to produce what our next generation may be. We can't have a situation where we ostracize or we cause one segment of the population or a couple segments of the population to feel less than or pale in comparison to another. So again, just coming back to that whole need for some sort of a national exercise where we really educate our population on the different religious practices and so on in a way that we have not done before.
Nikolai, I like what you say about the cultures and a blending, a coming together, and so on, outside of the narrow politics that we follow all the time. And the other statement you made that I think is important was the fact or the need for a sense of a basis for of the parties or the groups, whatever they're called, coming together for the purpose of uniting and moving together. But if I remember correctly, and I'm sure that David and Ramona will remember, there was it a 10-point plan of principles that were outlined in 2010, which all of the parties signed on to. But soon enough, those principles, according to those who defected and those who had problems with the goings on in the party, it didn't help. This set of principles did not help.
Yeah, well, Tony, thanks for that. I've given the backstory to the Faizabad, the signing of the Faizabad Declaration, which was on the 21st of April, symbolically, because the 21st of April is the anniversary of the declaration of the state of emergency in 1970. Of course, there was more than one emergency declared by Dr. Williams. That one was 1970. There was a second one in November of 71. But it was symbolic because Makandal Dagal was one of the signatories to the Faizabad Declaration, and he was there on the stage in Faizabad. And of course, he was one of those who was detained during that state of emergency. So there was a certain symbolism. And Errol MacLeod, who signed on behalf of the MSJ, was a successor to George Weeks as President General of the Orthodox Workers Trade Union. And George was also a detainee, political detainee, on the 21st of April, 1970. So there was a certain symbolism there. But the backstory was that what was actually signed that evening, the nice piece of paper that was signed, was not the one that was finally agreed upon, because some changes had been made by Mrs. Prasad Bissessa at the time, and Mr. Dukran was not happy. And up to about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I was mediating between the COP and the UNC to have a document that everybody agreed to. And we did agree, and Mrs. Prasad Bissessa made a commitment that what she agreed to would be the final document. But we didn't have time to get it reprinted. So what was signed that day was not the actual one that went out in the manifesto. What went out in the manifesto actually got signed on the closing rally of the campaign in Arangwas, when I was able to get all the leaders to sign it. That's just a backstory to that. And I chaired that meeting in Faizabad, so I'm very familiar. And you're right that in the view of the MSJ and a number of others, the commitments that were outlined in terms of principles were in the Faizabad Declaration were not being adhered to by the government. And so we made an issue of that, eventually left over that, and the failure to implement key policies in the manifesto, which would have led to change governance, significant reforms in terms of governance. But in terms of the unity issue, I want to back up a little bit and go back to a time when, of course, I wasn't around, neither were you. But the workers' movement in this country was the force of unity. The working class, of course, being the vast majority of the population. And so in 1919, you had a general strike. It wasn't a general strike that everybody was on strike at the same time. It was a rolling strike. But at some point in time between about October, November 1919 and early 1920, virtually every major sector of the economy, and therefore every major group of workers went on strike. It began in the docks, but it included all workers on Lake Asphalt, sugar workers, workers on the cocoa estate, railway workers, store workers, and so on. So that was a manifestation of unity. It was under the leadership of the Trinidad Workingmen's Association, not led by Captain Cipriani at the time. He came in a little afterwards, but by rank and file dock workers. So that was our first major demonstration. If you go further back in history, you could go back, say, to the Jose riots, where African and Indians in San Fernando were arrested and beaten and killed by the police. So there have been moments of uprising, mass movements, where Indian and African working people came together. Another key moment was, of course, 1937, when it wasn't just oil that shut down, oil and sugar and the docks and railways and stores and so on, the cocoa estates in Trinidad, not Tobago, but in Trinidad shut down. And then, of course, 1970 was, excuse me, a moment when there was building a unity of the working class with the march to Caroni and the involvement of sugar workers and support for that particular march. And of course, just after that, the state of emergency was declared. So we have had efforts to unite, but those things have been less, in my view, significant by the parties than by the mass movement. So you're right, in terms of political parties, 1986 where the NER was a key moment. And unfortunately, the leaders of the day were unable, and particularly Mr. Robinson, was unable to understand the import of that moment and the dynamic of that moment, and therefore to hold on to it. There's a famous anecdote which Darcus Howe told me when apparently Mr. Robinson, then Prime Minister, went to visit CLR James in London, and CLR was very alert mentally, but was always lying down because his legs were weak. And he was always had like 10, 20 books surrounding him, reading simultaneously. And Robinson probably thought he wasn't altogether there and said, Mr. James, do you remember me? And CLR is reported to have quipped, of course I do. You're the young man who always wanted to be Prime Minister. Now that you have gotten it, what are you going to do with it? And I think that went clear over the head of Robinson, right? But that is the issue. And then Mrs. Prasad Bissessar had that opportunity in 2010 with a significant coalition and parliamentary majority. And then she has gotten another one now. And so these are moments when people, in the absence of a mass movement of workers and so on, fighting on the ground for fundamental change, the mass movements have been reflected perhaps at key electoral moments in 2010 and again in 2025, in terms of the groundswell of support for one party or the lack of support for another one. And the question though is, and you're right, we don't know if it's going to hold, whether it's going to succeed. It really depends on the capacity of the leaders to manage this process well, so that when she says everybody wins, when the UNC wins, that now has to be manifest in real terms. Yes? Yeah. And if it is manifest in terms of sections of the society apparently winning, then we're going to revert to the old politics of race.
Yeah. You know, you talk about memories. I remember very clearly the morning after 1986, the election of the swamp by the NAR of the PNM, etc., etc. There was a news conference called by Mr. Robinson at the Holiday Inn. It was Holiday Inn Zen. And when I turned up there, expecting to see a representative section of the NAR, it was Mr. Robinson and some of the members of the ONR. And so that the morning after such a victory, in my mind, the thing started to disintegrate one time. Where was Mr. Pandey? Where were the other leaders who had come together in this alignment? So that, these things mean something in terms of the party holding together. So the question now is, and I go back to Ramona, maybe you can tell us in your mind why the thing did not work in the ways that it was supposed to. David talked about the what's it called, the principles of, remind me, that was signed and not signed.
Yeah, the Fraser
Declaration. Yeah. And there seemed to be a little controversy over that, but these things can be fixed.
Yes.
What has to be done is the long term. What were some of the things that broke the thing apart? And I ask you that as a means of getting from you what lessons have been learned from that to avoid that kind of thing happening again.
The conflict was really at the partner level, the partners of the partnership, the leaders of the partnership. At that point in time, Mr. Abdulah could correct me if I'm wrong, but there were 5 of them. It was Mr. Dukaran, Errol McLeod, the Honorable Cameron Prasad Bissessar, Ashwa Jack. So it was 4, and so it was 4 leaders.
Makandal Daga.
Yes, Makandal Daga. So I think the conflict really stayed amongst the leaders, because I can tell you, as a sitting member of parliament, going to the constituency, engaging with my constituents and the wider public through the ministries, I don't think the people on the ground were fully aware of what was happening. It was more of an internal conflict. I don't think that it really spilled out until the latter half of the term, of our 5-year term, because as Mr. Abdulah would say, the conflict started early on from 2011. Things started to not gel together as we expected. So so that apparent conflict, with the partnership became known by the general public later on in our term. But we worked inside to keep it together. We really worked inside to pull it together. Things were happening that I may not have been aware of because, whilst I didn't sit in cabinet, I sat in FNGP, which is similar to cabinet in terms of the structure and all of the senior ministers sitting together, discussing cabinet notes and deciding. So I was quite aware of a lot of things, but at cabinet on a Thursday, I was not aware of what took place there. But I saw the leaders of the partnership trying their utmost and their best to keep it together without that overspill in public too early on during the term. To identify, I know the union, the MSJ represented by Mr. McLeod and Mr. Abdulah and the others, they had their issues, as he rightly said earlier on. The COP had their issues. Ashwood Jack across with the TOP, he had some issues also. And then you remember, we lost that THA elections early on. I think it was in 2011, 2012. So we lost that THA elections for a number of reasons. So that started to weaken the partnership. But I must say, as a sitting MP, at that point in time, an elected representative, we were still able to access the resources and to do a lot of the developmental work on the ground on behalf of our constituents and the population. As you know, I don't have to rattle out the projects, but Mr. Fraser, without getting too much in detail, because Mr. Abdulah would be more aware than I was at that point in time. I think we did a pretty good job to keep it together for 5 years. And we didn't implode within that first term. We were able to go to another election in 2015. And well, from there, you saw that the choosing of the candidates and the lack of other partners who fell out of the partnership and their absence in the 2015 elections was then the real indicator at that point in time.
Ramona, are you saying that the conflict was situated and kept amongst the leaders and did not filter down to the supporters of the party or parties?
Yes, that was my perception of it, because as a sitting member of parliament and going to the constituency, we had our regular party activities, we had our partnership activities. When we had our rallies and our meetings on the ground, the COP would be there in their white, the MSJ would be there in their blues, and McCandle Dagger and his party would be there. We would have all the speakers on the platform. So it appeared, the perception, in politics they say perception is the reality. So the perception on the political platforms for that 5 years was one of unity. Even though there was internal conflict, there was a unifying presence that was shown to the public for most of its term, until probably the last year.
What in your mind were the sources of the conflict?
As I said before, the unions had their issues. I don't know in detail everything, but they had their issue. I think Mr. Abdulah would be able to expand on that. The COP had their issues, one or two cabinet decisions, one or two things that I saw in FNGP in terms of policy projects. Constitutional reform was something that we all spoke about a lot, that we wanted to get out there, we wanted to get done. Somehow the time just evaded us, and we were able to bring about meaningful constitutional reform and what we campaigned on in 2010. So that was just one of the reasons that there was dissent.
Right. So we're going to come to David in a while, but Nkoli also had his experiences in the parliament in some attempts to bring different groups together. Tell us about that, Nkoli.
Sure. I saw, most importantly, my role as a young person in Parliament, on the independent bench in particular, as being to bring to the fore the interests affecting young people. And for sure, race and religion and these topics are things that do interest young people in the vein of why are these still issues affecting us and dividing us? Going into the parliament, I had my suspicions of how things would go, considering you're there in the midst of two major political parties, and you're supposed to be on the independent bench. And to my surprise, I felt very much, that we had, when the cameras, the parliamentary cameras were off, I saw great camaraderie. It was very shocking. I didn't expect that. I remember very distinctly you would have had UNC members, PNM members occupying the same elevator going to the tea room. And I was just very shocked in a good way about how they conducted themselves and so on. But that I felt should have translated to the population in terms of not just how individual
All right. We seem to have lost Nkoli for a moment. Okay. Maybe he's in a difficult place. I think he's on his phone. So maybe he's in a difficult place. David, the sources of the conflict within the People's Partnership.
Yeah, I think there was at root cause was this view of what the partnership was supposed to be. Was it a partnership simply in government, or was it really a partnership of 5 political parties? And so we never functioned as a partnership of 5 political parties. Yes, during the campaign, that may have been so to some extent. And it was early in 2011, there was a meeting of all the members of parliament, both those who had ministerial positions and those who didn't, Senate and House of Representatives at the Diplomatic Center. And members were expressing various problems and challenges and so on. I remember there was a little debate about, I think it was the exchange rate or something like that, and what was happening in the economy. And I made a statement, and somebody said, David, go to the top of the class or something like that, and kind of a snide remark. And I said, that's where I've always been, right? And the place kind of cracked up. But Mrs. Prasad then asked a few of us to sit down for a short while to see if we could to pin down some of the fundamental challenges that the government was having. And when we came back, she then proposed that the chairpersons of the 5 parties meet, and she asked me to convene that meeting to come up with a plan going forward as to how the coalition, the partnership should function. And it was Jack Warner representing the UNC as chair. Ayagora Ome represented NJAC. Joseph Tony represented the COP. I represented MSJ. And from Tobago, his name will come back to me in a moment. Stanley Baird represented the TOP in Tobago. And we sat down, we met largely at Jack Warner's office, his CONCACAF office and so on, and maybe once or twice at the ministry office. And we hammered out a very long, we discussed at length, and I wrote that draft of the report, and it was signed off on by everybody. And we presented it to the leaders. It was actually presented on the first anniversary of the signing of the Fraser Declaration. So this would have been 21st of April, 2011. And it was a very substantial document. And Jack Warner's view at the time was that if the partnership implemented as coalition of parties, half of what was there, we would be in government for very many terms. Because what we had identified actually was both communication. We identified the need for a newspaper organ of the partnership. Remember, social media was not as pervasive in 2010 as it is now. So a newspaper, we proposed that the second-rank leaders of each of the parties meet collectively, and then a general assembly of not members, but like delegates of parties meet on a regular basis, so that the government rather, could get feedback from our people on the ground as to how the population was seeing the performance of the government. Because it's very easy for government to become disconnected from the population. MPs get disconnected from their constituents because particularly their ministers, they're busy in ministerial office and parliament and so on and so on. And a whole host of proposals that we put forward. Regular town meetings where the leaders of the partnership report to the country as government as to what the government was doing. And a number of things. I have the report because, of course, I wrote it and so on. And the leaders never discussed it. I presented it more than once and so on to several leaders. By that time, by early 2012, Prakash Ramdial had become leader of the COP, and I had taken over leadership of the MSJ. And that is when MSJ, early in 2012, made a statement, maybe March or April, saying that we were giving us 3 months period for the partnership to get its act together, or we review our position in the partnership. And we identified, it was a very long statement, very carefully written and so on, the elements of the Fraser Declaration and the manifesto that were not being addressed. Constitutional reform was one. There was no labor legislation reform. There were a lot of fundamental changes in governance in terms of how boards worked and so on. The issue of stamping out nepotism and favoritism of party faithful, because a lot of that was going on, and so on. So we identified a lot of those issues, and when the leaders met, unfortunately, we never got around to discussing that report of the chairman in a significant way, all the fundamental questions that MSJ had identified, because at that time, the conflict flared up between the COP and the UNC over Marlene Kudre, who was a COP person and mayor of San Fernando, and then she became a deputy political leader of the UNC. And the COP felt that they had been ambushed. They no longer had the position of mayor of San Fernando, and there was a lot of angst over that. And a lot of the meetings, several meetings that we had as leaders, centered around that. And we never got back to the fundamental questions and so on. So when you have a coalition of parties, it's really a party of parties. And remember Lloyd Best writing about that, and the fact that the NER was a monolithic party, when in truth and in fact, in structure, but in truth and in fact, it was a party of parties. There were different elements. And you remember Mr. Pandey's face after the 86 elections when he was interviewed, when he was looking very unhappy about the outcome, even though the NER won 33-3. But he realized that his seats now were in a minority in that 33, and therefore the power relation. Yeah. So how do you craft a coalition where it is not monolithic, or that a dominant party does not control and the others are put on the sidelines, so to speak? And we never got that right in the partnership.
David, what has been? Sorry, you want to go ahead? First,
yeah,
go ahead.
I just want to interject to say that remember 2010, then Prime Minister Patrick Manning called us snap elections. So in that environment, remember that the election was supposed to be in 2012, and he called it 2 years earlier. So that was a snap election, and then racing to get all the partners together, being led by Prasad Bisesa, Mr. Warner, seeing that the only way to defeat the PNM at that point in time was through national unity, similar to the 1986 model. But all of that was done against the backdrop of a snap elections being called, and also having a month or two, Mr. Abdulah, to pull it together.
It was short, but the point is that the Fraser Declaration did establish some important things, and there was a process to write the manifesto, so that the parties had representatives on the drafting of the manifesto. MSJ had 2 young people who were our representatives in the manifesto drafting, and actually they ended up being 3 manifestos, but that's another backstory which I'll give another time. But the manifesto that was eventually shared with the public made major commitments, and that is why I'm saying that while all the details of how the partnership should have functioned as a coalition of parties was not worked out prior to the election, you're right, but there was the opportunity afterwards, and that was the report of the chairman of the parties, which I wrote, and which others, Mr. Warner, Mr. Tony, Stanley Baird, Igor Ome, we all participated in coming up with that document. And that laid out a very important methodology and process for the 5 parties to work together as parties, not as members of cabinet. I see that is where the problem lies. And you remember there was a meeting of the cabinet. At the point there was a talk that Prakash Ramdial was going to leave, and so on and so on and so on. And there was an emergency meeting up at the DIP Center, and we were all supposed to be in the meeting at the same time. But those who were not members of cabinet were left outside, and we stayed there for mostly 5 or 6 hours while the cabinet met. And then later, about 10, 11 o'clock at night, we were invited in. And the non-cabinet members were asked by Mrs. Prasad Misesa as Prime Minister to contribute. And when I got up and said, it's now 11 o'clock and it makes no sense for me to make a contribution, A, because people are too tired to have a serious discussion, and also that, short contributions can't be addressed in this way, and so on. And I sat down, and her response was, because I said, well, I would pick up my discussions at the level of the leaders of the partnership of the parties, and she said, no, this is the cabinet, this is where she's going to have these discussions. So again, Mr. Robinson exercised power as Prime Minister, yes, and I remember when in 1987, it was the 25th anniversary of our independence, there was a conference organized by Professor Selwyn Ryan, ISCR at the time, at the Hilton, to look at the 25th anniversary of independence. I was there to present a paper from Labour standpoint and so on. And that morning, a number of ministers were present at the Hilton. And a lot of them I knew, and they spoke to me, and they were expressing concerns about race in the cabinet, right? And while we were there, they were saying this privately, it wasn't a public conversation, but while we were there, Mr. Robinson announced that he had dissolved the cabinet. That was when John Humphrey was removed, and he then reappointed other people and so on. So he used his power as Prime Minister, and if therefore the recognition is not there that you cannot run a coalition and bring about unity through simply the government and cabinet, or even in parliament and the optics of the parliament, you really have to do that at a deeper level. And that didn't happen in the partnership, and time will tell whether it happens in this process going forward.
Now, David raised a point which struck me as being important in his first contribution, or the contribution before this one, when it came to fundamental issues, the draft that you talked about, that you wrote in conjunction with the other members, the hard issues which were supposed to be agreed upon were not. And so I am wondering if it is a question of political parties agreeing on the outlines, but when it comes to core issues about power sharing, about responsibility for XYZ, about the way forward in terms of developing the country, etc., etc., there is a lack or insufficient, I don't know, of commitment to those difficult issues which we have struggled with for more than 100 years in this country.
Yeah, Tony, one of the challenges is that when you're in government, you then get pressed to do 1,000,001 things to deal with the problems that people have. And so a lot of time and attention is then focused on the day-to-day issues, roads and drains and, health system and so on and so on. So the demands of government are, put a lot of pressure on people's time and energy. There's no doubt about that. And therefore, the big picture, the big ticket issues tend to fall down the list of your priorities, yes? Now, you also have the challenge, and it therefore comes back to constitutional reform, Ramona mentioned that, of members of parliament having to be constituency representatives as well as ministers of government, etc. And that is all, and you have other parliamentary responsibilities, joint select committees of parliament and so on and so on. So they're public functions and all of that. So you really then have to have a very focused attention on what are the strategic priorities. And some people may therefore not be involved in the day-to-day governmental issues, and you have to have other people then who are focused on some of those strategic things. I'll give you an example of a controversial one, Venezuela. When Hugo Chavez was first elected president, he didn't have a political party. He came in on the basis of a mass wave of support because he had led a military uprising and so on and so on, and because of the policies of the Carlos Andres Perez government of the day, and he won. But one of the first things that Chavez did was a process of constitutional reform, which became very deeply embedded. And I can't speak now, but there was a period when Venezuelans used to be able to bring out their constitution and refer to article this, that, and the other, because they were part of developing this new, radically different participatory democracy. And that enabled him actually to survive a coup d'etat and many other things like that and win many elections and so on. And I think that, therefore, if you were to ask the question, what are some of the most fundamental things? People will say, well, crime and healthcare and education and this and all of those are right. But if we don't do the constitutional reform and the one you have raised in your column, but and which I myself have been dealing with at People's Roundtable level, which is party finance and campaign finance with legislation, then the status quo will remain, and it will be more difficult for governments to really solve the problems that people have in their day-to-day lives.
All right. Let me ask, Nkoli, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah. My signal would have dropped.
I'm not too sure if what you heard and if you heard all of that.
Yes.
But one of the issues that I'm trying to get at, which David raised first, is the business of the difficult decisions, the constitutional reform, the economic diversification, and all of those make the cohesion of the politics and the political parties. Those are real issues. And I must say, it's very early in the term of this government. But, I hear all kinds of things, and perhaps not being a politician myself, I suppose I don't understand the importance of, tinkering at the edge, having a man go up to the president's residence and talk foolishness and so on, when the serious matters have to be dealt with. So I don't know, as a young fella looking on at these things, what are your views on them?
Sure. One of the things I think is very important, and we in the Progressive Party, that's the party I would have founded in 2019, and the reason why I would have chosen to go the route of establishing a political party as opposed to going with some of them that existed previously was because I didn't find that there were political parties that quite fit the bill in terms of their philosophies, their ideologies, and so on. Maybe it was just like Ramona, coming out of education, thinking about politics or being involved in politics thereafter. You bring some sort of an academic lens to some things, and especially if you've existed in the social sciences, well, even worse, so to say, because you would be very critical of issues in society and have an opinion, not just backed by feelings and just surface opinions, but really having taken an in-depth looking at theories and so on. And while not everyone in society is expected to, let's say, learn the theories of Marxism and so on and have an intimate knowledge of it, there are those of us entrusted across society with a tertiary education, given that we've had the opportunity of GATE and so on, and we've really taken advantage of it. And so we want to start to see the society evolve in ways which, while the man in the street may think about the bread and butter issues, we too are thinking about the bread and butter issues, but in less emotive ways. So one of the things that, coming back to the point, one of the things that I think is very important is for political parties to engage in the difficult work of really shaping their political parties in such a way where at any point in time, policies and positions can be presented in a way that is easy for the population to understand, that is easy in some sense to translate into government policy and positions in that regard. And with the greatest of respect, I don't think that in Trinidad and Tobago we have engaged in that kind of exercise in the way that we ought to. There are still questions about, and for some it may not matter, but for others it matters a lot. What are the political ideologies of parties? Where do they stand on issues? Have they generated policy papers? Do they have their representatives attending conferences and pronouncing on these positions and so on? Because it will make for an easier transition from how you conduct yourself in a political organization to now the government and the cabinet of a country. And so while political parties may be thinking, okay, in 5-year cycles, how do we prepare for the next the next election? I think data is so very important, especially when dealing with issues of this sort. And Trinidad and Tobago has not done a good enough job in terms of gathering data. For instance, when we look at the elections, there is no exit polls. So how are we to see that certain policy positions and so on resonate with political groups, with particular groups across the country? Do we see a strong support from young people on this issue? Do we see strong support from female, middle-aged, East Indian housewives, so to say, if we just put those categories together? And I think it is very important, those kinds of exercises, to test what people's real feelings are across the board. So coming into that preparatory work, it was unfortunate, as was mentioned there, that there was a month or so to prepare, coming together with these positions and so on. And you would have had, I would imagine, some political parties far advanced in those kinds of discussions and so on versus others. But across the board, how do we as a nation really ventilate these issues? There aren't public debates. It's not mandatory. We tried that some time ago and it failed miserably because there was a lack of political will from political leaders to really see the value, I think, in those kinds of debates, because in some instances it may show up the weaknesses of political parties. And rather than being able to take the criticism and go back to your membership and to your party officials and try to iron out those kinks, we have seen political parties altogether avoid those opportunities, and it's quite unfortunate. So I'm getting to that whole thought of, we have to be willing to do the hard work. It doesn't start when you get into government. It starts from the day that you decide you are going to join a political movement. You are going to offer yourself one day. So this is all part of the course. And my hope is that as we move forward, these political parties will see the value in it. I know the current government speak about unity. And there are those critics and so on who would say that it may be just fluff and just to get in office. But now the hard work of the population holding that government to task, no matter what administration, to the principles, the values, the ideologies, the philosophies that these parties have said or espoused upon, whether they have said it directly, that this is our policy position, or speaking on a Monday night forum or at a political meeting in Belmont or in Shogunas West, wherever it is. I think that we need to really capture that data, hold them accountable, and at the end of their term as well, judge them against the background of the things they have said and done. And I think that will be a more fruitful and productive exercise if we were to engage in the name of unity and bringing individuals, groups, and so on together.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Nicola. Nicola is talking about even the kind of activities that is required outside of the formal political parties amongst people in the community. I don't know if Ramona has left us. Ramona, are you still there? She seemed to have...
She seemed to have fallen off. I don't know if she will come back inside, but for now she's fallen off.
Okay, so you can expect Dr. Ragoonath to come in at some point in time. He said he would come around here. I wanted to ask Ramona the question of race or ethnicity, however you choose to couch it. What kind of role it plays in terms of the breaking apart of the alliances or the holding of them together. David, you've been in a few alliances where race has been a major factor. Race meaning that there have been political entities that come from an African element or an Indian element or both. How important has been the race issue in terms of initiating conflict within the organization?
Yeah, I told you I just saw Ramona put something in the chat saying that she had to leave, apparently. Okay. Yeah. So certainly in '86 and the breakup of the NER, I think race was a significant factor. As I mentioned, what ministers, both African and Indian, were sharing with me. I suppose they figured I was neither of them, so they could confide in me. And so I think race was a factor in '86. Of course, '86 was quite a long time ago, and therefore the demographic of the society was different in 1986 as well. So that the support of by Basil Pandey came largely from rural, central, and South Trinidad sugar workers and cane farmers. Now there's no sugar industry anymore. Still significantly rural, but they're also, highly urbanized and suburban communities in central and south. So I think the demographics has been changing, and therefore the factor of race in causing a coalition to break up is less significant now, or ought to be less significant now than it was way back then. I do think, though, that one of the challenges is how do people who newly come into government, and not just Indo-Trinidadians, if their party has won and they've been out for a long time, but also the PNM. You remember the comment by Shamfa Kodjo in the parliament shortly after 2015 in a riposte to some member of the opposition. And she said, we're in charge now, you better get used to it. I'm paraphrasing it, but it was something like that. And there have been other, so you get persons who come into office as ministers, and quite honestly, they may not necessarily know the best way in which they should be performing their duties. So they take an oath of office to do right by all manner of men, whatever it is, without any ill will, fair favor, ill will, right? Whatever the word is. But the practice of it, of governance, is problematic. And of course, once you have a multiracial society as Trinidad and Tobago is, you then get all kinds of echo chambers from sections of their voter base, both sides, PNM and UNC, who then interpret and reinterpret the statements by ministers through an ethnic lens and reinforce that, whether those statements were made with any ill intent or not, but they can become easily inflamed in that way. And that is something that we have to address. I suppose the famous one, there were several ones. You remember Mr. Manning said one time he was looking for Indians for his cabinet? You remember that one? And then there was the other one of a Guardian newspaper, if my memory serves me right, of Indian takeover. Maybe the word
it was GB's song. What's it? Gosh, I remember it in number one. But GB had a calypso about calypso rising. It was Chutney rising, and that blew up a whole lot of conflict within the Guardian and without of the Guardian.
That's right. Yes. So and I mean that's the headline may not have had a deliberate ethnic bad intention, but it was perceived by the Indo-Trinidadian population as an affront to them that they have no right to be in positions in government. Yes.
Yeah. When in fact, David, if you remember the calypso, it was indeed a recognition of the Indian population rightfully coming into place, because GB was singing about Calypso taking a place amongst, the musics of the world, etc., etc. But of course, Mr. Pandey interpreted it in his own way. And I know personally because he attached my colleague Jones Madeira. Jones told me all about the conflict and so on. So,
Yes.
I suppose people are touchy and they perceive reality in the way they want to do so.
Yeah. And then the other factor I want to raise is where power sometimes traditionally lies. So there is a Port of Spain centric issue of power, because that's where the parliament is, that's where the cabinet meets, that's where most of the government ministries are, and so on, where the major corporations, be it the conglomerates, Massey or Ansa McCall, or the BPs and the Woodsides and the energy companies, that's where they have their head offices, that's where all of the executives live, and so on. The banks, that's where the banks have their headquarters, that's where the executives live. So there's a Port of Spain centric power, and persons who are not part of that Port of Spain culture can feel, somewhat being pushed on the outside and so on. And all of these things are dynamics that we have to understand. And how therefore do our leaders, the political leaders now, because they now are in charge of the whole country, how do they navigate and manage all of those factors that exist in the society? Or how does a Keith Rowley, for example, just to use another example, very black Tobagonian from Mason Hall, how does he then enter into the space of rural Indo-Trinidad, which is not his natural space, right? And those are things, but he had to, and he didn't, he had to try to then communicate to them as well as to Mason Hall or another part of the country. Because Trinidad and Tobago is always not one. We begin with always not one. They're different Trinidad and Tobago's. They're very radically different Trinidad and Tobago's.
Okay, so just to inform our listeners, we're talking about a possibility, looking at what can happen using the Indian Arrival Day as a kind of wedge to talk about the possibility of the groups holding together over a period of time, given, as we are fully aware of, the Indian community is in power through the political party. And when I say the Indian community, we all know that the UNC's core base is amongst its culture and its kin and so on. Just like when the PNM is in power, notwithstanding a few people who are in front of the cameras, but essentially the two groups are divided in terms of their ethnicity and their cultural leanings and holdings together. So we are attempting to see if there's some kind of possibility and some kind of learning that can take place with the particular party now in power and their associates. And I am sure that all of us know, and David talked about it in part, is that if you have a party of one party of the coalition, how many seats? 26 seats, and I don't know what is the exact figure, but one party holding 21 or 22 of those seats. There is a power imbalance which will present itself in all kinds of ways in the discussions on the sharing of power and so on. In one instance, what's his name? Prakash Ramada is on the outside. His party didn't do anything, I suppose, in the eyes of the political leader to warrant him getting a ministerial position. Maybe he will get a board of director position somewhere along the line, but that's another story. So, Charles, I wanted to take a break, give our listeners an appreciation of the station, the programming, and then we continue. In the meantime, look out for Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath, who is supposed to come in at any time now.
Okay, no problem, Tony.
to leave here, I must be mad. My island is the only place to be. All year long is happy activity. The Pagua, Carnival and Jose, Independence and Labor Day. Diwali is something to see, the faith that lights up a great country. Baptist together, right here. Hindu together, right here. Muslim together, right here. Christian together, right here. My country, Trinidad. For me to live here, I must be mad.
Everybody together right here, sweet Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, this is the Drive Time Exchange right here on New Era TT Radio. And of course, Monday to Thursday, we are here inside of the Drive Time with Tony Fraser. And today, well, he's getting all the rest of all the holiday and everything. Of course, this is New Era TT Radio. You can find us, just put us in your browser, put New Era TT Radio, and of course, all the ways you can find us, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be on YouTube, Instagram. We're also on TikTok. You can pick us in with the recorded programs there. And we are streaming on TuneIn and on our website also at www.newerattradio.com. And as Tony always says, we need the money, right? Tony, I'm going to adopt this statement, right? Yeah. So if you'd like to advertise in this space, you can call us at 299-5156. That's 299-5156. So we are back inside, and I see Dr. Ragoonath has joined us also.
Wonderful. So welcome to the program, Bishnu. Glad for you to be here with us. We've talked about a number of things, including, what have been the difficulties. As I think I indicated to you, the overall objective of the program is to see and situated on a day before Indian Arrival Day, and given what is happening in terms of the government, as that a number of smaller groups have come together, non-Indian groups have come together with the major Indo-Trinidadian party. That does not mean that there are not supporters from outside of the Indian community, but just like with the PNM, the core group is, as we know, from the constituencies where the Indian Trinidadian community exists, live, etc., etc. So we talked about, the difficulties in holding together. One of the points made earlier on by David Abdulah had to do with the failure of the People's Partnership in 2010-2015 to deal with some of the difficult issues which were codified, as it were, in a paper that he presented, worked on by a number of people within the organization. And some of the difficult, one of the things that struck me was that the party, like other parties, sometimes veer away from dealing with hardcore issues, constitutional reform, diversification of the economy, dealing with the crime situation of the present, and those kinds of hard issues. And we've come to the point where we're talking about race as a factor in terms of parties falling apart, as in the instance of 1986, 2010, etc., etc., and other points in time. Your view, I think David said that if it was as strong in the past, it is not so strong today. your view on that issue as to whether race continues to play an important uh, or to be an important factor in parties holding together or falling apart.
Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you for allowing me into the program now. My view is that race continues to be an important issue. Whether it should be the issue that is holding the parties together, that's a whole different issue altogether. But it remains an important issue in how we vote and how we select our governments. And the parties that take power fall back on that issue of race to a large extent. What we know for a fact is simply that, if I may go back all the way back to independence, when we developed drafted our independence constitution, we built a nation, we didn't build a country. We didn't build a national identity. And that continues until today, that lack of a national identity. And because there's that lack of that national identity per se, you have these segregations, these blocks. So the Afro-Trinidadian bloc over the PNM, the Indo-Trinidadian bloc over the UNC, in the main. To that extent, that remains today. And more importantly, whereas in the past there have been attempts to tinker and to treat with some of those issues, we never really got into the meat of the matter. Remember, you may recall Patrick Manning, when he was Prime Minister, had a round table with Selwyn Kojo and others to deal with the issue of race. Then too, Patrick Manning had set up the Center for Ethnic Studies, I think it was at the
right. Laguerre and Ryan.
And they did several reports on the issue of race and how it impacts upon the society. And
I'm just looking at a couple of them in my bookshelf on the ground there. I don't know that they reached anywhere, but go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so that I think was a good starting point, that we needed to put the discussion of race on the center of the table and start treating with it. But again, because of the way our politics have evolved, there have been that attempt to now push it to the side and deal with the softer issues rather than the hard issues. And I think it is time now that the society recognizes that we need to deal with those hard issues. Now, in the 1970s and in the early 80s, once we were in that economic boom, we didn't have a problem. When things went bad, people segregated further, and the lack of respect for the various, by the leadership, further hastened and created the problem even more. What we need now to do, and this is one of the things that maybe this government may do, I don't know whether they will actually do it, is actually put it back on the table and have frank discussions on race and how we go about dealing with it in the society. The good thing about the coalition of interests, if that's what it is rather than the UNC, is simply you have various other groups coming in there who may have issues that they will want to put on the table. Whether or not there'll be room to deal with it openly, I don't know. And whether this government will want to deal with it in that way, upfront, center and upfront, I don't
know. Yeah, but in your mind, it remains a difficult issue.
Very difficult issue.
So my question from that is, will that be instrumental, or will it be seen as a great possibility of bridging the gap between the two major ethnic groups to deal with the concerns of one? One, when the PNM gets into power, you see a stream of black faces and power seeming to go into that direction, and the reverse happens when the UNC gets into power. In this time, there are different shades inside there. Not only shades, but social classes. They would recognize that there are two labor leaders inside of the government in some places and so on. Will the party, will the government, more the government than the party in this instance, be able to hold these disparate elements together over a period of time?
Well, to a large extent, these disparate elements came in there because of other reasons, not necessarily about race. They're about economics, for instance. So the trade union movement, they're about their concerns and how people are being treated at the bottom of their rungs. So that is one of the issues. The other entities that came in there, well, apart from the trade union, we know about the PSA and the OWTU. I am not sure. I admit ignorance one time about where Philip Alexander and his PEP stands at this point in time. I really can't say as to where they are. And really and truly, the COP, I think they just came in there to some extent as window dressing to say that they are part and parcel of this coalition of interests. I mean, and the mere fact that Kamala Prasad says did not see fit to give Ramadan anything at this point in time clearly suggests that's how she probably sees it. So, in a way, when you look at the coalition of interests, many of them have their own interests, which is not necessarily about race.
Yeah. Okay, David. What about labor in this coalition? I'm sure that you're completely familiar with the labor politicians who have got into office in one form or the other. Will there, and perhaps you can take us back to 2010, will the labor leaders feel satisfied with what they get from the coalition?
Well, I don't know if it's so much what they get, but what gets delivered to their interests.
Yeah.
So
that's what I mean.
I figured so, but I just thought I'd put it slightly differently. Yes, and of course they went in with a labor agenda, which had been discussed with Mrs. Prasad as the UNC for quite some time, and so there'll be certain measures by which that will be successful. One is labor law reform, because a number of pieces of labor legislation need to be either repealed and replaced or significantly reformed. The Workmen's Compensation Act, for example, is something 60, 70 years old and needs to be completely replaced. And there are others that need to be amended, updated, Occupational Safety and Health Act, and the Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Act, and so on. So they're clear on what needs to be done. Now, it then is going to be up to really the Prime Minister to, having made commitments about Labour's agenda, to ensure that the Cabinet approves amended Labour legislation. The Minister of Labour has a role to play to bring the draft legislation to the Cabinet, but it could stay in the Cabinet for years unless it's given priority, and the key person to give it priority really is the Prime Minister, because all the other ministers want to have their ministry's reform agenda, brought forward as well. So, fortunately, there are 3 persons from the trade union movement who were in the cabinet. Before it was McLeod in 2010, just 1. So there are 3, which creates a little bit more of a dynamic. But I think even more important than having 3 persons in the cabinet is the fact that both Ernesto Kiza, Point Fortin, and Clyde Elder Labre won those seats, which were held by the PNM for a very long time. I think the only time the PNM lost it was in the 86 sweep by then, yeah.
Critical seats.
Yes. Yeah. So that gives a certain amount of strength to their position in the government, because they now, did something that was, the UNC couldn't have done that on their own. Yes. So I think that gives them some strength and some leverage. But quite clearly, like with all governments, civil society, including the trade union movement, has to make their voices heard, and therefore to comment and to, not just privately, but at key moments publicly about, the status of the labor agenda. How is the 10% starting point wage negotiation going to be addressed? When will that be addressed? I suppose we may hear something in the midterm budget review. Those are the things that the organizations outside of government now have to be vigilant about, and not simply say, okay, we have 3 members in the cabinet, we could now believe that everything is going to go okay, because that doesn't happen, because politics is about the pursuit of interests. And there are many different interests all the time, including interests that were not part of the coalition of interests, national interest, interests that exist nationally. The conglomerates, the Chamber of Commerce, and this group and that group, all of them saying this must be done and that must be done, and so on. So politics is about contestation of interests, and how those interests resolve, and in who benefits most from how those conflicts get resolved.
One of the things, David, with regard to labor, and I heard Clyde Elder on this radio station, actually on the morning program, talk about their demands being non-negotiable, and especially the labor laws and so on are very important, but I am sure with regard to pleasing their membership, is that the whole business of salary increases, wage negotiations, and so on will top all of the list as far as the labor leaders are concerned, because they have to report to their members. That is going to be a difficult hurdle to cross, given what we all know to be the financial state of the country.
Yes, but I have some thoughts about, I won't express them publicly now, but I have some thoughts about how it in fact could be addressed. And so it's going to take some, I think, negotiation and some mature engagement between the trade unions and their respective employer, whether it be the CPO or whoever, and of course the CPO and the other state enterprises and so on will be guided by what the Minister of Finance advises, But that is a challenge, but it is something that firm commitments were made publicly in the campaign, and therefore you can't back from those, yes? Yeah. And everybody knew that the country was not in a great financial situation, so you can't plead now that the thing bad or worse than you thought it was. Yeah. So you now have to find ways and means of addressing it. I think, the Prime Minister has been attempting to suggest that there's, waste of resources here, there, and everywhere. And if you cut some of those things out, you can find money to do other things.
A kind of Trump policy.
Well, yeah, but you notice Elon Musk has decided he's retreated from that now, right? He's gone back because when he saw the big, beautiful, whatever Trump calls the damn thing, budget, Musk said, well, no, that is undermining all that I have done. And he must again.
And my car is getting burnt and not coming off the showroom and so on. He never that choice.
That's right. I think one of his rockets blew up yesterday again, right? Yeah. So yes. So you can prioritize expenditure and reprioritize expenditure. There's no doubt about that. And quite some time ago, people have been saying to the government, the last government, the Rowley government, you don't have to engage in some of these big, massively expensive infrastructure projects. Deal with issues that will improve people's lives on a day-to-day basis. But they have this, PNM have this fixation about mega projects. And of course, mega projects also means that there are ways and means of getting money for election campaigns. Yes.
So the question must be, with these pressures on the government, and what I am really concerned about, as I indicate, It's still very early. It's what, a month, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, or whatever the time frame is. And maybe I'm being personally too harsh on the government, but looking forward to what is going to happen to earn the kind of revenue that is projected to be spent. More so that you're refusing revenue, and I know David's position on these financial matters, taxation matters, and so on. But nevertheless, if you're going to turn your back on possibilities for tax revenue and you plan to spend more than it is conceivable to spend, then we're going to be in trouble. So I am a little bit concerned about that. No movement. I'm not saying that tomorrow they should transform the economy, but I'm saying that we need to hear some of those things. I haven't heard it so far.
No, I suppose that's why I said the midterm budget review is going to be a key marker too.
Yeah, right. Let me go to Bishnu on the question that we talked about, meeting those expenditures, and of course, Nikolai will also have concerns about meeting the needs of young people in the society. But let's go with Vishnu first. Well, how is this going to unfold?
Meeting those expectations, the government has to raise revenue. They have no other option. As to how they will do it, I mean, I'm happy that David said that he has some ideas that he probably discussed with his colleagues and so on, and get that through the pipeline to get to the government. But the point about here is simply one says that many of the things, or several of the things that we've been asking of the PNM government for years, maybe this might be the time for it to really start. I mean, we've seen, for instance, one critical issue that I've seen happen within the last few weeks, and I think it was simply the notion that they're going to try to at least get back into rice production. And to that extent, well, all right, well, we are finally moving into what we call diversifying the economy away from oil and gas and at least becoming self-sufficient in food. And I think that is one of the things that we need to kind of focus on. The government has to put a lot more emphasis on how we can become much more self-sufficient and how we can diversify the economy in order that we, one, save foreign exchange that obviously we have a crisis in, as well as to deal with some of the local issues in getting foodstuff to the market. I mean, we talk every year about flooding and everything else, and flooding pushing up prices, but then we still have this taste for all this imported food. And I think that's one of the things that the government will really have to start paying some attention to. As to other sectors of the economy, I'm hoping that they will at least promote some entrepreneurial spirit and facilitate young entrepreneurs to at least get involved into business activities that would allow them to either generate new sources of funding and finance rather than simply going back to the old route. We've talked about it. I mean, my former principal had made the point over and over that you have to find young people who not looking for jobs, but rather who wants to create jobs. And that is something that the government may really have to focus on. And that's where, for instance, Nikolai, and talking about the youth, would really have to come in and say exactly what the youth can do. I mean, one of the probably good things, well, I shouldn't say good, but rather, one of the most recent statements coming out of the Trump administration is the fact that students will have problems getting visas to go to the US. Does that mean that they will all stay here? And if so, one, we're going to save foreign exchange in supporting them abroad. But more importantly, what can they be doing here that could help to generate and diversify our own economy, if that is what we're looking for?
Vishnu, you might get some additional students, man.
Definitely. Today we had a meeting, and that was one of the things, we were saying, well, maybe we might get more students at UE now.
Nikolai, what do young people want of this government, and how are they going to make their overtures to ensure that they are not left behind?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I would hope, especially the youth leaders across Trinidad and Tobago, would call for, and hopefully we can see this government seeing it through fully. We need to have a nationally recognized voice for the youth in this country. It shouldn't be just Nikolai coming onto a radio program, or you hear this one here or whatnot. But the National Youth Council, I think, is very important for our country, our country's youth, to have an established voice that is allowed some level of credibility. So I hope off the bat that that is something that the new Ministry of Youth and Sport would be able to look into. When we think about it, quite frankly, a lot of the interests of young people today have not necessarily changed over the years. So to see, young people want to have stable jobs, they want opportunities, they want to be able to contribute to national development and national discussions. And as on one end, the National Youth Council will be able to assist in providing that. However, we have to talk the reality of technology and where it is taking us at nowadays. And we would have had the last administration committing to a work from home arrangement. And to be quite frank, I think in as much as the government then would have spoken to that issue, it was really to appease the masses, because one cannot reasonably expect the population to think that it will take 2, 3, 4 years for a national policy to be written in the first instance. We haven't spoken about the idea of, carrying that policy around, shopping it around, seeing if there is interest in it afterward. As far as I remember, the then Minister of Public Administration, Senator Alison West, she would have advised the nation that KPMG would have been successful in its bid to draft that work from home policy, and we were supposed to get it in a year's time and so on. But to date, I haven't heard anything about that. And this is an issue that affects thousands of young people, where they feel as though the idea of getting up early, earlier than is necessary, having to get on the highways and so on to get to a job in a highly centralized area, I think is quite unfair when we have technology literally in the palm of our hands. And we need to start training the population to adopt the technology in the way that we know our future generations will be utilizing it. So we can't just continue to prepare, or not rather prepare, cater to the needs of this current generation, but the generation to come thereafter. And I think that locally, a lot of young people are making strides, and young people have opportunities to do great things, but it tends to be outside of the country. And we don't see that level of government support in getting young people into some of these conferences, into some of these meetings, attending some of these competitions where they can really fly the flag of Trinidad and Tobago high. So those are some areas, of course, that I think young people today would really be interested in. Securing housing is a major, major issue for young people. Statistics show, data show that to these generations today are having less and less children in terms of families. And if I am to use myself as an example, at the age of 33, I had expectations for myself that I may have been married, I would have had children of my own at this point and so on. But the reality has hit hard that I do not have the capacity, the ability, the means and the resources to start a family of my own. And when we look at the national environment, we can see where a lot of times those who do have start families of their own younger and younger, they are running into many issues. They are highly stressed. They don't have the kinds of support that our parents and our grandparents would have had in terms of the family and so on, and the services that are available. You would expect that as we progress, so to say, as a country, that access to certain things would be easier. But today, people are still fighting for food cards. Today, people are still trying to get grants and so on, and there's an even greater dependency on your member of parliament, having to go to your MP to ask for a job and think that should have been something of the past. We should have been able to go onto a national register and see what jobs are available in the public and private sector, and see as well if using AI built into these apps and platforms, seeing if we are a good match for it. I think those are ways in which we can reform the public sector and ensure that people are in the right jobs, doing the right tasks, and are being judged fairly by their work ethic and so on. So there are great opportunities. I think that on one end, the government is on the right track, this current government, as we now have AI as being a component of the Ministry of Public Administration. But it can't be just talk shop. It can't be just adding a name and expecting that somehow things are all going to work out. So the hard work has to be done, but we are already seeing signs and hearing commitments from this government. And if for anything else, this at least gives me some hope, because to expect off the bat that the government will fail, to expect or to wish that the government's demise comes quickly and swiftly and so on, I think is doing a disservice to us as a people. No government will get it perfect, but I think that young people coming into, and we seeing a government coming into office where there is an abundance of young people in the generation known as Gen Z, Generation Z, and they have a bigger appetite for quicker results, quick implementation, quick solutions. So if the government and persons before thought that us millennials, we were too demanding, I think that we now face a new population, a new generation that is going to have even greater demands, which to them and to others are still reasonable demands, considering the resources available.
So Nikolai, the question I want to ask you to wind up on is whether or not you think that the president, to go back to where we started, is that the present regime can hold together and to deliver on the promises that have been made, more so to allow for the country to have an opportunity for the ethnic groups and the various forces within the government, the labor, etc., will hold together sufficiently to deliver on all of those things that you talked about for them.
Sure. Well, I think that most definitely the government's success is dependent on it. It's not a question of if they can, they must, in order to survive, because it's not going back to 2010 where you have the People's Partnership in that kind of a form. And it was spoken about earlier where really the UNC is the predominant entity here with all these seats and so on. So there is not going to be an opportunity to say that we aren't able to achieve because we are fractured and so on. Even if we remove those two Labour seats, the UNC still has significant seats in the Parliament to be able to execute the plans that it has set. And on the issue of race, when we look at the campaigning, and this was a point that I know I really wanted to bring to this table, we saw that a lot of the campaigns, the ads and so on by what is now the government, but then the UNC, the coalition of interest, it would have been geared toward Afro-Trinbagonian groupings and so on. When we talk about, or we look at the UNC aligning, if I can use that term, with some Trinidad artists and the Prime Minister, who would have been at that time the opposition leader, but the political leader of the UNC, repeating phrases or lines from certain popular Trinidad songs and so on. We saw predominantly that a lot of Afro-Trinbagonian faces and skin tones would have graced some of those ads and so on. So the UNC had to embark upon a campaign of that sort because you already have your home base and you are now trying to attract another base. So a lot of attention had to be placed on pandering to the needs, if I may, of that ethnic group. So there is a lot of expectations, and this was brought upon itself by the UNC, and I think that it has the opportunity, it has the support if I may, in order to execute on this plan of national unity and bringing all under the fold?
David Abdulah,
Yes, well,
culminating point.
Yes. Well, I think there's a moment, there are always these moments in history. 86 was one, 2010 was another, 2025 is another, where the country could see significant reforms. And I'm talking about the ones we discussed earlier, the more fundamental questions, constitutional reform, governance changes, because the structure of the economy is really still the old plantation structure. And until we deal with that, we are going to have problems. The decision-making structure of power is still the old colonial state, being, tinkered with and modified. But until we are able to create institutions and spaces for people to have real decision-making power and input and influence from a grassroots level, we're going to come back and say, well, the government didn't do this and the government didn't do that, because there's a disconnect between government and the people. So we need constitutional reform, we need party campaign and finance legislation, labor legislation reform, and the beginning of economic, not just diversification, but some structural changes. Those are the difficult ones. But there's a moment, there's an opportunity to do that. And the time will tell, Tony. You and I might still be around to be able to judge whether it happened or not. I still hope to be able to make an impact sometime coming up, not now, but coming up to bring about that change, right? I still live in that hope.
I neglected to make the point that you were part of the EDAB grouping, which produced so many programs and policies and so on, and they were just left behind, But,
ignored. They were ignored. Yeah. And we could go back to many other memorandum and stuff that things were discussed and papers presented. Dennis Panton did a conference on industrial policy way back in the 80s. And, countries are now reverting to industrial policy now. But at one time, the neoliberal agenda was, that's a waste of time. The state not supposed to be involved in those things. So let's see what happens. There's a moment. And those of us who are not in the government have to press and push and cajole and advise and offer suggestions for betterment.
Bishnu, your microphone.
What I would say is simply something that I said after the 2020 elections, when we had an uproar based on some comments made by one of the UNC supporters, and overall talking about the race issue and putting it into the front and center. I think one of the things that we have, as David would have said, we have the opportunity now with a government that is there, and that government has to show one thing. It has to show that it has respect for the people. In the same way it wants the people to respect the government has to show that it has respect for the people. And to that regard, to that end, the government made several promises. They may not be able to deliver all of them in 1 month, in 1 year, but they have a 5-year period. They have to give that acknowledgement that they made promises. They are going to hold to their promises. Whether they cannot deliver, whether they will have to deliver it in year 5 of the term, well, so be it. But the point about it is that they have to show that they are respectful of the citizenry. And when I say the citizenry, the entire citizenry, and go forward with that.
That's a feature or capacity that the last Prime Minister, not Stuart Young, the substantial Prime Minister, did not have within his armory.
Definitely.
So he knew everything about everything, and he had to shout everybody down who had a view that was opposite to it. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here, and I thank Ramona too, who did say before the program that she had to run off at some point in time, and she did, but nevertheless she made her contribution. Thanks again for coming on. And just to indicate, well, we won't normally have a program on Friday, more so tomorrow, given that it's a public holiday. But we are back here on Monday. for listeners who remember, yesterday we had the former PDC of the campus, Brian Copeland, talking about this whole South campus and all of that. And we are hoping to get the present principal, Bishnu, to come on next week to talk about her end of the matter. So we thank you very much, and we look forward to next week and the days thereafter for more discussion on the issues facing the country. Sir Charles.
All right, thank you very much, Tony, and of course, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here on New Era TT Radio. Of course, stay with us, people, and we have so much more for you as we go into the holiday.
So I tell them sweet, sweet Trinidad, first I love this country bad, I don't want to leave at all, ever since I was small, look a ball in sweet, sweet Trinidad, brother first I'm feeling glad, when I'm dead please bury me in the center of the city, yeah, tell you. We got we big oil field just in South. We have all kind of things to talk about, no regret. You just have to get up and